Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Maeve McDermott, and I serve as the manager of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative. It's with deepest pleasure that I invite you to this legal roundtable session that's being held during Climate Law and Governance Day, titled Galvanizing Climate Ambition Through Climate Competent Lawyering by Lawyers and Law Associations. This session is being hosted by the International Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. And with that, I'll turn over to the chair of the session, Advocate Emily Morison, who's a project lawyer at the International Bar Association, an esteemed Australian qualified lawyer specializing in decarbonization strategies and regulatory compliance risks. Emily is a member of the National Environmental Law Association in Australia and has previously held positions such as Associate Fellow with the Center for International Sustainable Development Law and Coordinator of the Climate Law and Governance Initiative, as well as the Judge's Associate at the Victorian Supreme Court of Appeal. And so with that, Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maeve, and thank you to everyone for joining today. Welcome to this session, which, as Maeve indicated, is convened by the International Bar Association, the Brazilian Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. We're really grateful to the Climate Law and Governance Initiative team for convening this important symposium, and we hope that you've been enjoying today's session so far. Yes, I'm Emily, and I'm a project lawyer at the IBA's Legal Policy and Research Unit. For those who aren't familiar with the IBA represents the global voice of the legal profession, with over 80,000 individual lawyer members and around 190 bar associations and law societies spanning across about 170 countries. Today's session is on climate competent lawyering, what the term means, what it looks like in practice, and how law societies, bar associations, legal alliances, and civil society organisations can raise awareness of this evolving duty and support climate ambition among the legal profession. We're so fortunate today to get to discuss these matters with an excellent panel of legal experts. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to just take a moment to highlight why it's really important and timely that this session at Climate Law and Governance Day 2024 is devoted to the role of lawyers and bar associations in responding to climate change. As I'm sure many of you watching today are familiar, particularly over the past 3 years, we've seen a growing recognition among the international climate community of the role that non-state actors, including professional service providers, play in either advancing or hindering climate action. Following its launch of a discussion paper last year at COP28, just a couple of months ago, the UN Race to Zero released a report on how professional service providers, including lawyers, can support the transition to net zero through their provision of advice and services, noting that a number of law firms are already taking steps to do so. Just yesterday at COP29, a UN expert group report was launched that highlights the need for service providers and all other non-state actors to align their efforts to the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement. In parallel, leading academics and law societies, some of whom are represented here today, are interrogating how climate change interacts with legal ethics and with lawyers' professional responsibilities. And these developments all really challenge us, I think, as members of the legal profession across all practice areas to be thinking critically about how climate change is affecting legal practice and how we should each respond. Against all that background, I'm so delighted to introduce our speakers today. And I'll just note that this is a roundtable discussion, so we really will try to make some time for questions. So as you're listening to the session, please do think about any questions you'd like to ask and put them into the Q&A box. In no particular order, our speakers today are Lara Douvartzidis, a Senior Legal Executive at the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance and Special Projects Officer at the Business Human Rights Committee of the International Bar Association, Pascale Bird, who's the Executive Director at Legal Response International, Hung-Yi Kuo, who is the Chairman of the Taipei Bar Association's Environmental Law Committee, Letícia Campos Mello, who is a dual qualified lawyer in England, Wales and Brazil, and Secretary General of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Brazilian Bar Association, Clíona Kimber SC, who is Chair of the Climate Bar Association of Ireland, Professor John Dernbach, who's Professor Emeritus at Widener University, Dominique Hogan-Doran SC, who is a barrister with the Australian Bar Association and is also chair of the IBA's Bar Issues Commission Regulation Committee, and Alasdair Cameron, who is the Climate Change, Planning and Environmental Law Policy Advisor of the Law Society of England and Wales. To kick off today's discussion, I'd love to turn to you, John, first, who, might I add, is up at an incredibly early time in the US, and we're so grateful for your participation, John. But John, you've written extensively about the evolution of climate conscious lawyering to climate competent lawyering. Could you tell us in practical terms what climate competent lawyering means and how it relates to lawyers' professional responsibilities?
Well, thank you, Emily, and my thanks to all of you for being here. As you heard, this program is part of an ongoing collaboration among many national bar associations and others about the role of lawyers in addressing climate change. In 2019, the American Bar Association's House of Delegates, which is its chief policymaking body, adopted a resolution urging lawyers to advise their clients of the risks and opportunities that climate change provides. The resolution also urges lawyers to engage in pro bono activities to aid efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. This approach is consistent with an article published by Brian Preston, who is an Australian lawyer and administrative law judge, that urges climate conscious lawyering. Preston defines climate conscious lawyering as follows. He says it requires an active awareness of the reality of climate change and how it interacts with daily legal problems. It demands first active exploration of the intersection between the issues of the legal problem or dispute and the climate issues. And second, giving advice in litigating or resolving the legal problem or dispute in ways that meaningfully address the climate change issues. Now, since publication of his article, several of us in the US have been thinking about the relationship between climate change and the professional responsibility of lawyers. The very first rule of the ABA, American Bar Association Model Rules of Professional Conduct, states, a lawyer shall provide competent representation to a client. Now, under the rule, a competent representation requires the knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for the services. Now, earlier this year, Professor Irma Russell, Matt Bogosian, and I published an article. It's called The Lawyer's Duty of Competence in a Climate Imperiled World. You can find it online by searching for the article's title. Again, it's The Lawyer's Duty of Competence in a Climate Imperiled World. We argue that incorporation of climate change into client counseling and representation is not optional. It is required by the duty of competence. Since publication of the article, many of us have been using the term climate competent lawyering rather than climate conscious lawyering to emphasize this point. Lawyers do not have a choice about whether to incorporate climate change into their practice when climate change is relevant. And climate change is making itself relevant in a wide variety of legal practice areas. Several decades ago, climate change was mostly confined to environmental and energy lawyers. But John Kerry, who is President Biden's special envoy of climate change, said in an ABA meeting in 2021, you are all climate lawyers now, whether you want to be or not. That sentence to me has two important points. You are all climate lawyers, which I think is true, and whether you want to be or not captures the obligatory obligation of this. Now climate change is relevant in nearly every field of law: business and corporate law, real estate law, contracts law, torts law, insurance law, and civil rights law. Every lawyer needs to be aware of the possibility that in any client representation, climate change may be relevant. So what does that mean in practice? Well, our article on climate competent lawyering identifies 4 principles that can be used as starting points. 1, a lawyer should understand enough about the changes in climate-related physical risks facing his or her client's activities to advise the client about these risks and how the client can mitigate or adapt to them. 2, a lawyer should anticipate that climate change risks will alter the way existing laws and regulations apply. for example, force majeure, negligence, and the like, and advise the client about how to mitigate and adapt to these risks. 3, a lawyer should consider the risk that counterparties, parties on the other side to transactions may change their customary ways of doing business with one's client because these counterparties adapt to risks of climate change. For example, property insurers in coastal areas vulnerable to climate change may decide to limit the availability of insurance or raise the price. And a lawyer should advise the client about how to mitigate or adapt to risks like that. Finally, fourth, a lawyer should understand what a just and fair transition to decarbonization means for his or her client and advise the client about the risks and opportunities that entails. Now, these principles make one point crystal clear. While some lawyers now fail to see climate change effects and will continue, how climate change affects and will continue to affect their clients, a competent lawyer cannot choose to be blind to the impacts of climate change. Since publication of the article, we've had further discussions about what climate competent lawyering means. There was, for example, a very good panel discussion in September for New York City Climate Week. A recording of that discussion is available, and you might see it in your chat later in the program. One final point. While the duty of competence does not require leadership by lawyers, the magnitude of the climate crisis requires us as lawyers to exercise leadership. We need to lead an effort to incorporate climate change competence into legal practice and legal education. That's a big job, and it's our job. And again, I'm pleased to be part of this panel, and I look forward to hearing what others say.
Thank you so much, John, for framing that so beautifully for us. Now turning to what climate competence does look like in practice. Dominique, I'd love to go to you first. You've obviously got a really varied and long experience in a whole variety of practice areas. Can you give us some insights on what climate competence has looked like for you and some of the risks that lawyers can face when they don't consider climate in their approaches to legal advice?
Sure, thanks, Emily, and thanks everyone for joining today. I thought what I would do is start by considering the sort of 4 prominent public arenas in which we're seeing barristers active and needing to demonstrate climate competent lawyering in our legal practices. The first arena is we're seeing increasing enforcement activities by regulators, very high profile actions alleging greenwashing and market disclosures and marketing claims. The second arena is we're seeing barristers leading and defending class actions, either shareholder cases for misleading statements in relation to net zero targets and the reasonableness of transition plans, but also class claims against governments seeking to establish the existence of a duty of care to particular vulnerable groups. And so in Australia, we've seen cases alleging duties to young people, and there's a current and very important case concerning Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. The third arena, maybe a little bit of overlap with the second, is strategic climate litigation, which aims to change corporate behaviour. And there's some interesting ethical duties there in terms of crafting those claims so they have a reasonable basis, because they are sort of tending to push the edge. And the fourth arena is leading and appearing for parties in public inquiries concerning the impact of climate change. This is perhaps a very Australian perspective, but Australia has a long tradition of public inquiries that are known as Royal Commissions. And in 2020, Australian governments established a Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements, and I was senior counsel assisting that commission. And we called a range of expert witnesses and assisted developing recommendations on new laws and policies concerning climate change and disaster risk. And that was as disparate as local planning laws, building codes, emergency management arrangements, workforce and employment laws, constitutional issues concerning distribution of federal and state legislative and executive powers and the powers of local government to try and address climate change impacts. Emily, I've spoken about litigation, but Emily suggested I also do a briefer but deeper dive into my advice work for the Australian financial sector to sort of illustrate where climate competence is needed. The first main area is obviously advising in terms of governance and complying with the core duties to act in the best financial interests of members or policyholders. That's, say, superannuation funds or insurer clients, and to take due care and diligence in the exercise of director duties or trustee duties. The second area is in terms of compliance with disclosure and reporting obligations, not just avoiding greenwashing risks because of those enforcement risks, but also complying with the new climate-related financial disclosure obligations and potentially in future nature obligations, disclosure obligations. And the third area is just a little bit niche, but it's investment policies and construction of investment portfolios. And I should say I have a background as a director of a regulated industry super fund. So I bring sort of governance and risk management perspectives to my legal advice. And there it's dealing with climate risk in all its forms, physical transition and liability risk when constructing investment portfolios and deciding when selecting and when divesting out of assets and the risk of assets becoming stranded. And I should just say that we're here at the Finance COP here at Baku in Azerbaijan, and there's been a big focus on the role of institutional investors in financing a just transition to net zero. And Australia has the 4th largest pool of superannuation assets in the world. As at 30 June, it had $3.9 trillion. So that's a very large capital pool and so there's some important legal work to come with regulators and government as how that pool can be mobilised at sufficient scale to provide climate and carbon finance and to enable net zero and even real zero. I just want to make one last comment, if I may, Emily, and that's about the ethical duties for barristers. This is more with my International Bar Association hat on. Australia, like most other common law jurisdictions, we have a split legal profession. So solicitors and barristers have different obligations. Solicitors can pick and choose their clients, but the cab rank rule means that we're like a taxi waiting at the rank. We have to take the first client that comes along. And that means we've got to be ready to deal with the broad spectrum of clients across the community who are going to face new legal risks, liabilities, challenges. And to make that work, we have to be competent to do it. And that means we have to be informed and skilled and ready to assist those clients on climate change related matters. But we also have to be careful we're not over-promising, that we're not ourselves greenwashing and saying we've got a specialist skills that we don't have. We're not seeing regulatory action in that space yet, but it may come. We're seeing courts and bar associations policing competency in relation to the incompetent use and misuse of artificial intelligence in litigation. So that's something to watch.
Thank you so much. And yes, AI couldn't be a more hot topic, I think, for legal professionals to be thinking about across all spectrums. Lara, I'd love to turn to you next. You've got a swathe of practical tips that you can provide us on what climate competent lawyering looks like from your extensive experience in this field.
Thank you so much, Emily, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be dialing in. I'm dialing in from Scotland, sad not to be in Baku, but here we are. My name is Lara. I am a commercial lawyer. I now work at the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, and ever the commercial lawyer, I love being practical and efficient. So I have a number of tips, 7 in fact. But before I get started, use the chat. Let us know if you're a lawyer, where you're dialing in from, who your bar association is. We'd love to know our own audience. So with that, thank you, Em. And my 7 tips. First, understand the science of climate change and related issues like nature loss. If you don't know, there was a judgment in Fitch where Justice Holgate said you don't know about and can't act on what you don't know and you don't care about. So with that, shout out to John Lang and my organisation, the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, for building an infographic on the latest IPCC report, which is hundreds and hundreds of pages. So I'll drop it in the chat afterwards. Every link and resource I mention will go to you. You don't have to ask for it. Read this. It's very useful and it's digestible in a way that science sometimes, at least for me, science feels is not. The second is understand how your legal practice connects to climate change. Use the Hughes Hall Centre for Climate Engagement, the Law and Climate Atlas, which we build alongside Hughes Hall, to jog your thinking. I acknowledge that at the moment the resource only is available to the US and the UK. However, it's broad enough, I think, for I challenge any lawyer to read it and not find connections between their area of practice and climate change. And it's particularly useful if you are in an organization where you are having to advocate upwards for that senior leadership on climate, where you're trying to justify the business case of why to take this as an important issue. It helps think about opportunities for new clients, new matters. So I really urge you to have a look at that. And if you deal with contracts in your practice, also the Chancery Lane project has a number of resources. If you are dealing with, as many lawyers do, fiduciary duties, I would also mention our organisation has just launched a discussion paper on sustainable fiduciary duties, which is not a term you hear much of yet, but you will in the future, because that is the direction of travel. Third tip, Paris and NDCs. Read the Paris Agreement. Simple enough. I see some laughter. Read it, full stop. Second, read your country's NDC. Read your NDCs in jurisdictions where you produce legal advice. And when reading them, think about how to leverage those NDCs to identify new legal opportunities and matters for reducing emissions, adapting to climate impacts, securing climate finance, reflecting on laws that might be needed in order to mobilize that finance, to introduce those financial flows in line with Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement. Think about how aligning these services, lawyers can offer specialized advice on regulatory compliance. And there is something for everyone in the NDC. A friend of mine, Dr. Sharon Fitzgerald, calls it a shopping list for lawyers. So go shopping, have a look. And on that, on Paris in particular, shout out to Pascale, who we will hopefully be hearing from at Legal Response International. They've built an amazing app for your phone, which is a Paris Agreement A to Z, including resources on particular issues. So if you need a shorthand, I have it on my phone and use it all the time. I recommend it. Fourth, bar associations. Look at what your law association, bar association, depending on what hat you wear, solicitor, barrister, if there's a difference, what are they saying on climate change? Perhaps nothing, I hope not, but you will be surprised. Read the regulations that govern your practicing certificate if you are admitted, and think about that infographic for the IPCC while you do it, about properly conceptualizing risk. It builds on what John and Dominique have been talking about. It's a matter of competency for your profession. Think about what happens if you don't factor something in or explicitly carve it out. Does your insurance cover it? And not to get too dramatic about it, but think about how you pose a risk to your client in not advising them, whether they like it or not, as John said. And just for anyone in senior positions of bar associations, it would be my dream that we would have mandatory compulsory training for lawyers on climate as part of our renewal process for CPD certificates. We do for other things, for professional development. So I just think, what a simple way, top-down approach. But anyway, we'll get there. Fifth, framework for net zero alignment. If you're a commercial lawyer, look at the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance framework for net zero alignment. It was built by lawyers for lawyers about how to transform law firm spaces to transition to net zero and really take that opportunity to accelerate to net zero. It unpacks sticky questions about opening new matters that are maybe fossil fuel intensive. What do you do? What are our red lines? So don't do the practical thinking yourself. We've partly done it. We'd love the feedback. Sixth, and I will be quick, the UNGPs and human rights, okay? What has the Shell case taught us of the last 3 days? There is an indirect horizontal effect of fundamental rights in private law. We know that there is a connection between human rights and climate change. So read the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And of course, I would say this, I'm a business and human rights lawyer, but I'm also a commercial and environmental lawyer. Live and breathe them to develop on the Paris Agreement and deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, no matter what kind of lawyer you are. And we see cross-pollination. The Shell case 3 days ago that was published, it meant the Court of Appeal specifically mentioned a Brazilian judgment by Justice Barroso, who spoke at one of our panel only a few years ago that treaties on climate change are a species of treaty on human rights. So shout out to the Brazilians. And on that point, please always be respectful for traditional owners, First Nations people around the world, and Indigenous technical knowledge. rights of consultation and free, prior and informed consent. Think right from the beginning, be respectful, be an ally. I grew up on Kaurna land, worked on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'm very proud to be from a country that has the longest and oldest continuing culture in the world. So just to say, we see you and we hear you. Finally, climate transition plans. You want to be practical, you want to be a good lawyer, ask your client, do you have a climate transition plan? And if not, why not? And if you're not dedicating resources, build resources into your budget to build that plan. Look at it as an opportunity. Make sure people through the UNGPs are at that center of that transition plan. Because if our communities and our people don't think it's fair, it won't be followed. And we need people to be on the journey of the transition. We need people to understand, particularly at the voting block, when we're advocating to vote for pro-climate solutions. So with that, if you do those 7 things, you will, at least in my book, be a climate competent lawyer. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lara. Always practical, and thank you for really embedding the idea of climate competence in other really important matters, including human rights and respect for Indigenous knowledge. I do note that the high-level expert report that was released yesterday at COP29 does really highlight the importance of transition plans and getting those in place by 2025. So I'll put that in the chat as well. It's definitely worth taking a look at. I'm so grateful that we are joined by Pascale. She's managed to find a quiet spot at the COP venue to join us. Pascale, your work at Legal Response Initiative is such a fantastic example of lawyers contributing to climate ambition. Can you tell us a bit about your work in that space and what you think climate competent lawyering entails?
Thank you very much, Emily, and hello, everyone. Very pleased to be on this panel, and thank you very much to all of you joining us today. So, yes, my organization, Legal Response International, provides legal support to developing countries who lack capacity, legal capacity at the UNFCCC negotiations. And we do this. Why do we do this? Because for those of you who might be a little bit familiar with this process, it's probably one of the most complicated and complex multilateral law and policy making processes ever. So you have on the one hand delegation of industrialized countries that have large teams, often with legal experts and technical support, etc., who help them negotiate. And then on the other side, you also have lots of delegations, much smaller delegations who lack legal support, which impedes their ability to negotiate effectively and ultimately to shape outcomes. And so this is where we come in. What we try and do is basically to try and level in and create a more level playing field in those negotiations, so that those who are often the countries that are most impacted by climate change but have not caused it are actually able to shape some of these outcomes. So how do we do this? We have a small team on the ground. So indeed, I'm in Baku here with my team. And we also have a very wide network of lawyers in private practice, in academia, in barristers' chambers, etc., who have expertise in the different areas of law that are relevant in this process. And there are many, because as you know, of course, climate change is very cross-sectoral. And they provide this service on a pro bono basis, and they are on standby to assist us during the conference. And we have also some more junior lawyers who help us with research. So this network is absolutely key to us being able to deliver our service. We wouldn't be able to do it without them. And so I suppose I want to highlight the importance of pro bono, because, as I say, they provide this service as a pro bono service. So perhaps those who have done Latin or maybe know a little bit about Latin will know that pro bono stands actually for pro bono publico, so for the public good. And really, in sort of more modern term, what does it mean? It's about access to justice. So pro bono, I suppose pro bono is something that is quite ingrained in very many jurisdictions now, but not all of them, and so stronger than in some than in others. But fortunately, in most of them, it is now becoming really something which is very much a core part of what being a lawyer is. And there's an expectation on lawyers to do some pro bono work as part of their practice. So as I said, that it was about access to justice, and so essentially that's what it is. It is really about bridging the gap between justice and those who face challenges and barriers, whether it's for socio-economic grounds or other procedural, etc., reasons or have constraints. So the role of lawyers, I suppose, is about facilitating and enabling access to justice to those communities, individuals, and governments sometimes, and others who are facing these challenges. So I suppose at LRI, we see ourselves very much as, on the one hand, brokers between those pro bono lawyers who provide this service and then the developing countries that we support. But I suppose an additional dimension of this is that we also see ourselves as enablers of this climate competent lawyering that others have already been talking about. So we see that the value to those who are coming to support us of really encouraging, raising awareness about the importance of climate competence, which is gaining prominence, unfortunately, one might say, but fortunately, of course, for many reasons as well, but has traditionally not been, of course, the bread and butter of the big commercial law firms. So, as I say, it is something that we see as an important part of our role as well, of really encouraging lawyers to train themselves, to keep them, to upskill themselves, to treat that very much as part of their core continuous professional development. So that effectively as well, they can carry on supporting us. And we, of course, as well as providing training and raising awareness amongst the lawyers to support us, we, of course, very much as well provide training to lawyers who are in the developing countries that we support and who might not come to the negotiation, but who are tasked with assisting their governments to implement Paris Agreement commitments and achieve the agreement's goal, who work in private practice or working with civil society. So our role is very much as well, and I won't go into detail of that, but we do as well this sort of, in addition to this ad hoc support, we do capacity building and training to those lawyers as well at a domestic level. And perhaps just to finish off, so when we talk about climate competent lawyering, I think an element of it, perhaps more key, I suppose, so the core role of a lawyer. I've talked about the technical jargon used in the UNFCCC negotiation, and God knows that there is a lot of that, but of course it's not exclusive to the UNFCCC. So I think competent lawyering very much involves as well accessibility and making sure that we community to be able to communicate effectively to our clients. We avoid all these legalistic jargon, etc., whether it's in verbally or in writing, but we communicate effectively. And this is really part, I think it goes very much hand in hand with climate competence in my view. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
So much for that, Pascale. And of course, I'm so aware and appreciative of all the work that you do at the Legal Response International. We'll turn now to the role that bars and law societies are playing in supporting climate competent lawyering. But I do know that we have had a couple of questions in the Q&A about specific climate change litigation training for lawyers, and also any ideas for basic short courses for awareness for new entrants in the legal profession that perhaps regulators can introduce. Of course, the CISDL and Marie-Claire's brilliant team does offer a key essentials course on climate change, sustainable development, and the law course that is offered online by the Democratizing Education for Global Sustainability and Justice program at the University of Cambridge. And that's one of a multiple week program that might be something that you're interested in considering. There's also a number of universities that offer short courses that specifically focus around climate change. Specific to the Australian context, at least, I'm aware of a couple of Australian universities that provide capacity building courses. And of course, organisations such as LRI, I believe, do provide some capacity training as well. So there are a couple of things to think about. But there's certainly, I'll leave panelists to have a think about some other areas of education that they might be able to recommend. And we'll go to some more questions as we get closer to the end of the session. Turning now to think about the role that bar associations and law societies that can play in supporting climate competent lawyering. To kick off the discussion, I'd like to highlight just a couple of examples of the IBA's recent work in this space, because in 2020, the IBA published a climate crisis statement that sets out its position on the role of the legal profession in responding to climate change and, importantly, its links with human rights impacts. And that statement urges lawyers to, among a range of other things, act in accordance with their professional conduct rules and the rule of law, consider advising clients on the risks, liability and reputational damages arising from activities that exacerbate climate change. And the statement also encourages bar associations around the world to engage in educational programs on legal elements of climate change. And I think we're seeing from those Q&A, those questions, just how important education is for all of us. The IBA statement catalysed climate statements from other bar associations, and earlier this year, the IBA, with Lara's help, launched the IBA's online climate registry, where bar associations from across jurisdictions can upload their climate-related initiatives. And most recently, we saw the Law Association of Zambia upload its new climate change statement, and we believe that this is the first of any law association in Africa to do so. And I'm also very aware that some of our participants today, including Sarah at the Islamabad High Court Bar Association, have also contributed to this registry. And I encourage everyone who's on today's session to take a look at that. There's a lot of learning to be done. But perhaps if I could turn to Hung Yi, who is the chairman of the Taipei Bar Association's Environmental Law Committee first, I'd love to learn a bit from you, Hung Yi, about some of the recent work of the Taipei Bar Association, which of course is featured in our climate registry, to engage with lawyers on climate change. Thanks, Hung Yi.
Thank you. I have a slide and show to provide this year's Taipei Bars was invited by the IBA's. We claimed the climate change crisis declarations. So we follow the declarations. We do some things about climate change. First one, we quickly to start is the redistributions of domestic resource. The two is focused on the specific multinational enterprise. 3 is implementations of the carbon pricings. 4, we talk about what are the lawyer and the bar association doing. In the residence distributions of the domestic resource, especially in the cities, governments, and the land use plannings. In Taiwan, we have the land use laws, and we put the climate change factors into the land use plannings to consider the government, the city government should to plan the enough the green park or the green cities to let the city can adapt the climate change the disasters. And we want to talk about the urban area and the rural areas, the different resource. We try to balance the two different resource. Let the weak vulnerables areas they can give the resource to increase their resilience. So we try to help the government to do some cities government and land use planning. And in the specific industries, we can see the IEA's reports to 2022. It showed the powers and industries is the industries and building is decreased, and the powers and the transport is increased. But in Taiwan's the industry, especially the traditional industry, there's greenhouse gas emission is increasing and very serious. So we try to transformation the traditional industries, let them to decrease their carbon emissions. And the buildings, we talk about the urban planning to solve the problems. Then we make briefly the explaining expressions. We try to leverage the role of the lawyer in promoting the ESG and the UN Sustainable Development Goal to truly distribute resource, especially the different areas that balance their resource. In the international, we try to integrate the cross-regional cooperations among the lawyer and the bar associations. This year, we participate the Malaysia's bar associations, and we talk about the Southeast Asia's to cooperations to do the climate change and the ESGs, especially the enterprise, their ESG's responsibility. So we want to integrate cross regionals to integrate different bars association cooperation to make the difference the bar association can share the experience and integrate regional law activities to re-establish a consensus on the principle of climate change legislations. Like the Korea's, this year's the Korea's have the first constitutional judgment for the climate change. We arranged the travel to the Koreas to exchange their experience for Taiwan's, because Taiwan have two climate change litigations. One is executive court. One is in the constitutional court. But the two cases was all rejected. So we want to know the Korea's experience can help Taiwan's justice can know the climate change, especially about human rights, the protection is important. And regard the cooperation responsibles is the duty of the due diligence. Is we focus on the especially the big huge enterprise, especially the international enterprise like the TCMC. We want the international enterprise, they can do their due diligence, can reduce their cooperation internal carbon emissions, and they can to not just the carbon emissions reduce, especially the human rights protection, especially the modern slaveries, they make the carbon emissions increase the problem. And finally, we want to shift the focus, the business they can really practice from the maximizing the shareholders' profits to fostering social prosperities. Make the more focus on the social abilities is ours. Taipei Bar Association want to the enterprise or the Taiwan's cooperation corporation, they can do their job, not just to pursue the shareholders' benefits. They can always do the same things for the social benefits in the same time. So Taipei Bars Associations, one is for the commercials, two is for the governments, the locals, city government, and four, we focus on the human rights protections. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Hung Yi. I really do encourage everyone to read that Korean court judgment because it is a really, really important decision. And I really liked how you highlighted the importance of cross-jurisdictional dialogue on these issues. Turning to a different geography now, Clíona, can we turn to you next to hear about your work at the Climate Bar of Ireland?
Good morning, Emily, and good morning to everyone. It's the morning here. I'm in Dublin in Ireland, and I started my morning as I often do, in fact, about 5 meters from where I'm sitting in my rewilded garden. And I bring my cup of coffee out there and I look around and I listen and I hear whatever birds or animals. And even in November in Dublin, I can hear them and I can hear them calling to me, speak for me. What can you do for me? And that's what inspires me to come in here then. And I am now 5 meters later, a barrister and a practicing barrister at the Bar of Ireland and chair of the Climate Bar Association. So when we began about 4 or 5 years ago, just before COVID, Turlough O'Donnell, former chair of our Bar Council, set it up initially as the Green Bar Association with the idea of advising government, I suppose, in a sense. But quickly we changed to the Climate Bar Association. And when I became chair, it seemed to me, and in fact, Turlough O'Donnell is now coming round to this view, that we have got to inspire and we have got to bring my love for my garden inspires what I do. And listening to to Guo Hung about trying to get people to change their mentality, I think personally that they will only do that if they are inspired and they care. And I think Lara might have said that people will do what they understand, but also what they care about. So part of what the Climate Bar Association then, in addition to the other things, in addition to educating the profession, in addition to opening the eyes of barristers to see, look, you might be able to work in this area, these might be new opportunities. But as part of a year of natural justice, supported by the Bar of Ireland, we have done an outreach programme, north, south, east and west, to reach out and contribute to public debate. What is the role of law? How can lawyers link in with other sectors? How can we inspire and reach those perhaps who don't otherwise care? And I'm imagining many of us here today have some interest, but there are plenty of people just going about their lives. Perhaps they're too busy, perhaps they don't care. And part of what I see is the climate competent lawyering, and I'm just getting that phrase this morning from John, which is very useful, and I'm looking forward to reading his article, is to try and look out, reach out with our legal skills. So what did we do in our north, south, east and west? Well, we started with east. Dublin is in the east of the country, and we had a seminar on remedies. What are the alternative remedies? And the objective there, trying to get the lawyers, and this was an in-house one, the lawyers to think of different types of remedies when they go into court. How can they push the envelope? How can they push for the kinds of remedies that are needed for the environment? We then went north with Environmental Justice Network Ireland, which is very active and has its own database, EJNI. And we looked then to analyse one of the costs to environmental litigation, and we linked up with NGOs in the north of Ireland and in the south. When they were going about their strategic cases, how do they deal with the funding issue? What were the rules in the north of Ireland? What are the rules in the south of Ireland on costs? We don't have class actions, for example, in the south. We still have the old rules of maintenance and champerty, but we do have something called no fault, no fee, which allows a lawyer to take on a case and get their money when they win. Whereas in Northern Ireland, they don't have that, but they do have class action. So we met with some of the NGOs. Well, they told their story, if you like. This is what we did. And people talked about, one model in a gas caverns case in Northern Ireland, literally going from door to door fundraising, jumble sales, cake sales to raise the money for the litigation. And others talked about, having more of a shareholder type fundraising. And that was how they raised the money and what were the blocks and what worked and what didn't work. So that was north. We then went to the south, which was where I'm from, Waterford, one of the oldest cities in Ireland, and the place where the Constitution was drafted. And it seemed to me that was a good place to talk about constitutional rights. And we invited a whole pile of stakeholders to talk about rights of nature, and looking again at some of the New Zealand examples and some of the Brazilian and South American examples. And that quickly changed in what the local people there were interested in, was rivers. The three sisters meet up there, and there was a lot of, again, barristers, solicitors, but local anglers. There was a fisherman there, people of very great intelligence, but perhaps haven't had a lot of education, and people have a lot of education and maybe don't have a lot of climate intelligence, if I might put it like that. Trying to bring all those groups together. And we had a very interesting session in the south on rivers, personification, the ancient traditions in Ireland of rivers and river gods, and how you tie that in with modern corporate personality, and just trying to open the eyes. If a corporation can have a legal personality, so can a river. And then finally, we finished off west there a few weeks ago with a play. I commissioned a play. A colleague of mine, also a senior counsel barrister, wrote a play called Mountain River. And we put that on in Galway. As any of you who know anything about Ireland, that's the centre of kind of the arts in Ireland. And we had some students from the Arts in Action programme who put on a play. And we invited, again, local stakeholders. We had people from the Corrib Lakes. And it quickly became a discussion about fish and salmon and endangered fish, and some of the particular difficulties in Ireland about farming, nitrates, water pollution and fish. Again, with the objective of reaching out to people, raising awareness, and trying to inspire people. It simply has been my view, and maybe that's each person has to choose where they will focus their energies, but to try and inspire those who wouldn't otherwise care. And that's what I have been trying to do. And that's what all of the people who've worked in the Climate Bar Association have been trying to do. And I finish up, I think, this morning with, I was at, during the week, EY, Ernst & Young have a very good For Futures exhibition, presentation, I suppose, which is kind of going worldwide. And I attended at that. Showing the 4 different futures. You can imagine good, bad, and different, and how that might be. Again, they're trying to inspire a different way of thought. But what struck me, and what I want to close really, is one of their things on screen, is that there are no non-radical solutions left. So we have to be non-radical in how we think about law. Law traditionally has been a bipartisan rule, a bipartisan process designed for, by and large, A against B, and the remedies being either, I'm talking about litigation, the remedies being financial, ultimately the end, or getting government not to do something. But we have to think as lawyers outside the box, inspire those in all of the other areas, as John Dernbach was talking about, who don't necessarily want to know or care, but try and show that it is in their interests to think about radical solutions to tackle climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Clíona. Really appreciate your comments. I'd love to turn, we've got 2 more excellent speakers, Letícia and Alasdair, that I'd still really love to hear from. Letícia, could we perhaps turn to you next to speak to some of the work of the Brazilian Bar Association in this space, and then perhaps directly on to Alasdair when you're finished?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to participate in this amazing event with so many great panelists. And I really look forward next year with COP30 in Brazil to also participate in this amazing event. So I'm going to give an overview about OAB, which is the Brazilian National Bar Association. We comprise 1.4 million lawyers. We are not just the Bar Association, we are also the regulator of the profession in Brazil. We have a saying in law courses in Brazil, and also to pass the bar exam, it is one exam that it's made by OAB, Brazilian Bar Association. Having said that, we also have constitutional prerogatives to defend democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So last year, we have passed our first recommendation. I believe it's one of the first from a bar association in South America. And we addressed 3 pillars. One was for our 27 chapters. We have OAB present in each of our states in Brazil. For all the chapters to actively participate in legislative process. Also to challenge, because we have this prerogative as well, challenge laws and policies that negatively impact the efforts in respect to climate change, and to disseminate information and build capacity with our members. We have another issue in our recommendation that is towards lawyers themselves, and a little bit in the sense of climate competence, that we, lawyers, they shall and must advise clients about the risks related to climate decisions that in their business may impact climate efforts. And third, in respect to law firms and in-house legal departments, and as Pascale has raised the importance of pro bono work, we have also raised this in our recommendation, telling law firms to work more in pro bono issues, especially for vulnerable communities. Not just vulnerable communities, but also small business that are vulnerable and don't have enough support in respect to climate issues. And I think it's very important to say that just now, the Brazilian government has delivered to the UN its NDC's plan, which aims to cut by from 59 to 67% until 2035 its emissions. So this plan, in a way, it's a business plan to the country. It's our carbon budget. So it gives a message to the private sector and the public sector in Brazil that we are in a transition to green energy. And with this comes many opportunities. With this comes also the idea of a tendency to have more restrictive laws for biodiversity and environmental issues. So lawyers, they will need, and this is something that OAB is very concerned, to help the legal education. So to raise awareness of all the lawyers of the necessity, as Lara has mentioned, to understand climate law. And also not just climate law, but the energy itself, the transition, how this can be done, land use, nature-based solutions. So there is a whole bunch of things that lawyers need to understand to be able to give to render competent lawyering. So we believe that lawyers will need to understand more about corporate responsibility, ESG metrics, disclosures. It's going to have a raise even more in dispute resolutions and litigations in respect to human rights. As Lara also pointed out, the Brazilian Supreme Court was the first one to clearly say that the Paris Agreement is a human rights treaty. And we have an extensive foundation in our law, environmental laws, for many lawsuits to come. And we also foreseen as bar associations more interaction and cooperation with international players. We have the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act that influences companies that are operating in Brazil. So lawyers and law firms, we need to exchange more. And we will need to develop expertise in green technologies, renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, biofuels, and especially in Brazilian carbon market, which is gonna, lawyers, we need to understand how this is gonna function. We have a law that it's gonna pass now, and it's gonna be very important for lawyers to understand how the trade will happen. So the Brazilian Bar Association, it's very concerned about not just implementing climate competent, but also helping those 1.4 million lawyers to bring the understanding about it to its own practice. And we are also open to other countries that are Portuguese speaker countries to help them to also raise the agenda of, of its own bar associations and have recommendations of themselves. And we are here open. And if you on the audience are part of one of those bar associations, we will be very happy to connect with you and exchange information about it and help you also have at maybe your first climate recommendation, your bar association. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Letícia. Straight on to Alasdair, and then we'll try to fit in a couple of minutes for some Q&A.
Well, thank you, Emily. And this is just such a fantastic panel to listen into, as well as obviously now we're getting the opportunity to speak to, and what a great collection of global voices. This is exactly the sort of mindset that we're needing if we're going to confront the challenge ahead of us. One of my from my perspective as at the Law Society of England and Wales, we've been lucky in that I get to engage with a lot of really great, fantastic lawyers who understand the significance of this problem every day. And that is why we're able to do the work that we're able to do, which has touched upon, if, I don't have time to go through it all now, but go to the climate change registry on the IBA's website. It's all consolidated there. But mainly we produced guidance which looks at professional duties for lawyers and how they interact with climate change. And we're now producing a specific practice note looking again in different areas, which is really, I think this panel's really highlighted that all lawyers need to be engaged in this and looking at different areas, is how property and real estate transactions are impacted by climate change in the United Kingdom, and how lawyers need to raise those relevant climate risks to their client, both commercial and residential. Conscious that I do think one of these major changes that we're going to have to consider in the legal sector is how real assets are going to be impacted by climate change, particularly in jurisdictions where we've perhaps not considered real assets are being impacted by climate change, like the United Kingdom, seem to be less impacted by the extreme weather events of climate change. But as we've seen in terrible events across Europe this year in terms of natural disasters, that is simply not the case. And I think we're all fundamentally a bit ill prepared for it, and it will be the job of lawyers to engage in a lot of that sort of cleanup work, so to speak. One of my kind of real takeaway messages, I think, today for the panel, for the audience, I would hope would be, if you are here today, I hope that we are speaking to the converted on this matter, that you see the significance of this, that you see and want to understand how climate change is impacting your advice more and more. However, not all lawyers have that understanding. And I think if today we can all think about who more can we speak to in our practice areas? Where more can we have areas of impact? Where is climate change currently not coming up in conversations, both legally and also personally, along the lines of what many of the panelists have said? I think that would lead to some fantastic outcomes and start moving this forward, because at the end of the day, the reason why this panel, such as the one that we have today, exists is because many of those leading lawyers have given voice to the legal matters where they've been disputed as to whether climate change is relevant or not. And it has given the confidence, therefore, for various bodies, other lawyers, courts, public opinion to shift towards to see that intersection. And I believe that that will be a crucial role continually for bar associations to play across the world, to help their members understand that this is relevant to all of us and think about how we can advise clients accordingly.
Thank you so much, Alasdair. And I really do encourage anyone who hasn't yet read it to jump onto the IBA's climate registry and to take a look at the specific climate change guidance that the Law Society of England and Wales has published. And we've seen that trend sort of be picked up across the world, including from the Law Society of New South Wales in Australia. So please do take a look at that. We've just got a couple more minutes for Q&A. And one question that had come through from Dr. Boris Babin was around the correlation between climate and human rights defenders, especially in situations where normal justice is absent. Lara, I can see that you're typing an answer there, so I'm not sure whether you wanted to comment on that first, or I can offer some comments.
Sure, you'll save me the typing. It's an important question and one to always remember. I think it's really easy for us, but you know, I can only speak for myself, in quite a safe and stable environment to not think about climate defenders. They are risking their lives every day. People are dying every day to make sure that our forests stay forested, and a number of other issues related to corruption, particularly, as Dr. Babin said, in places in conflict zones. Last year, I remember being at the Ukrainian pavilion. It was the first time Ukraine had a COP pavilion, or that was at COP27 in Egypt, and half of the pavilion was centered around the environmental damage that the war has caused and what the cleanup will need to be. And just to say, there are a number of institutions looking at this. I know that the Special Rapporteur on the situation for human rights defenders, I think has done some writing about this. The IBA Human Rights Institute is looking at this and do work. There's also a report that the London School of Economics issued on corruption and integrity risks in climate solutions, which is an important one, and I just drop it into the link as the response. And just to say thank you for that contribution. In terms of the answers, I'm not sure there is one direct one, but always thinking about, and for sure bar associations always advocating for those defenders as best possible. And if you had any particular comments, Dr. Babin, I would invite you to comment.
Yes, of course. And I would just add to that, Lara, that I think there is that real recognition now around, and this is not specifically speaking to the Ukraine and Gaza hostilities, but just around the links between climate change, human rights defenders, and the broader human rights impacts of climate solutions. There was, I think, a statement that was released by UN experts earlier this year about critical energy transition minerals and how they need to be respecting human rights, and in particular the rights of human rights and environmental defenders, recognising that their voices have often been left out of this discussion. The IBA has published guidance on business and human rights, both for lawyers and bar associations, and there's certainly a lot of activity among a number of bar associations across the world with respect to issuing specific business and human rights guidance, for example, and engaging specifically on how lawyers need to be thinking about that in the context of their legal advice. Because of course, human rights considerations are just as important, and they're deeply linked with climate change, with nature, with everything that we're talking about today. So I really appreciate the question, and thank you so much to you, Lara, for providing those extra links.
No, just quickly, also looking at the correlation between countries and their NDCs and war, the Queen Mary University of London also issued a study this year on substantial carbon emissions from the ongoing war in Israel-Gaza. So just to also think about, when you're reading a country NDC, being a bit transparent and looking at where there may be some huge emission spikes and what we're going to do about that internationally also. Thanks, sorry.
Thank you so much. Just a couple more minutes left, and we have had just one more question come in through Simone, asking about how lawyers can work across borders. And this is specifically around a situation in the US with pollution emitting chemical plants to assist communities and similar disadvantaged, marginalised groups and communities impacted by climate change. Does anyone have perhaps some general comments if they're not familiar with that particular case in Cancerelli?
Just a quick mention, I don't know about that case, but one of the things certainly in Ireland, we're all on the same island, north-south, and the UK was in Europe and now is not. And Environmental Justice Network Ireland, Dr. Ciara Brennan, we're trying to look at how to cooperate, because Ireland is a very small island, but it's divided in the middle, and a lot of pollution gets stuck on the border because nobody wants to deal with it. So that's one of the things we're looking at.
Thank you so much, Clíona. And I am conscious that we've run out of time, but very, very happy to pick up that conversation separate to this session. So thank you to our wonderful speakers for attending today. Thank you to all of the participants who've contributed fantastic questions. We've really appreciated your insights. And thank you again to the CLGI for enabling us to convene this panel today. With that, I think we'll end this session. Thank you very much.
Bye.